Welcome to the Edufuturists podcast. This is episode 171. You'll know this by now, but you can go back and you can search the back catalogue. There are, over 171 hours worth there of content around the future of education. And we're bringing innovative educators from around the world to you and entrepreneurs, innovators who are at the cutting edge of education and learning. Go back and check them out. You can subscribe on YouTube, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, and check out edufuturists.com as well, because there you can access all of our past material. We also have events, webinars that have been recorded that are on there. Lots of content for you to have a look at. And also check out our annual awards, which we are gearing up towards for coming up at the end of June. So that'll be the Edufuturist Awards 2022, the fourth year running. So into today's episode, I'm really excited for this one. We're joined by Bob. Bob is the CEO and founder of Salad.com, and I'm going to bring Bob in right now. Bob, how you doing?
Dan, I'm great. Great to be here.
It's great to have you here. And so the Australian's accent is there, obviously, but I believe are you in the United States now?
I am, yep. So I've been in the States for 6 years now, and if there's one thing I treasure, it's my Aussie accent, Dan. They love it here. I can talk about the weather and people seem interested, so I've been very deliberate maintaining that accent.
It's great. I remember hearing years ago something about the Australian accent where it kind of goes up at the end of a sentence, and that's what. Yeah. So around the world, people will go up at the end of a sentence when they're asking a question, whereas Aussies apparently do it just with every sentence.
Just everything's a question. Yeah, perhaps. It's funny. I think I've heard that too, but obviously I don't recognize it when I'm talking.
Yeah, no, it's So whereabouts in the States are you at the moment?
So I spent the last 5 years in Utah, but I'm actually now in Puerto Rico, which is a territory of the States. So down in the Caribbean, down on the West Coast.
That's cool. That's got to be nice,
mate. It's lovely. It's really nice. It's a change my wife and I made 9 months ago, and haven't looked back, because after 5 years we were living at 7,000 feet there in Utah with 20 feet of snow, and about this time of year it's very cold. So happy to have made the move.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Being in the north of England, I think it was about 5 degrees Celsius today. So. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, get me to Puerto Rico. Bob, you've had such a varied career. We were just chatting before we went live. You kind of started off there trained to be a pilot. You were a pilot for a while. Is that right? Was that something you wanted to do since you were a kid?
That's exactly it, Dan. Grew up with the ambition of being a pilot, and went and got my license at 18, and came to quickly realize it wasn't the career for me, because there's no outlet for creativity as a pilot, for good reason, right? You don't want you don't want to be mixing things up as a pilot. So I never actually was employed as a pilot. I just got my license and came to realize this is not for me pretty quickly.
Right, that's cool. Yeah, I mean that's somebody's life ambition there, that that's their life, and so you've done that and you've moved on. And you am I right in thinking you created a television series for Netflix as well?
Yeah, unintentionally. So this is probably typical of like an entrepreneur's journey. You've got to be a little bit delusional going into certain projects, and this TV series called The Greenway Up was one of those examples where it was basically, to give you the short version, I had this idea. I just learned about transforming waste oil and vegetable fats and animal fats into biodiesel. So I designed, built, and operated this trailer that we dragged behind a car across Australia without filling up at a petrol station. And that kind of initial seed of a project turned into what was a a 12-part Netflix show and National Geographic show. So that's rewinding the clock sort of 10 years ago, but never went in with the intent of kind of being an executive producer, but ended up just through, I suppose, tenacity, making a lot of mistakes along the way, being one.
That's cool, man. So in terms of the trailer on the back of a car, so I mean, we could probably do a full episode on how that works, but
let's do it.
Yeah.
Trans-esterification was
right.
the process.
Go on,
if you want to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what it's like where you are, but we've just reached about £2 a litre for diesel, so we might be needing that trailer. So go on, how does it work?
Well, basically, so it takes the your waste oils. So say your local fish and chip shop. Eventually, the oil gets a bit too nasty to be cooking those famous English fish and chips in. Becomes quite acidic, and that actually can be converted into biodiesel, which I'm sure you've heard of, which can be run in most diesel engines. And actually, so that's the process of trans-esterification. Kind of removes the acidity, cleans it up for those diesel engines. And it was actually for this project a Land Rover Defender 130 with the 5-cylinder 2.5 liter TD5
nice.
that we did this journey on. So managed to do about 14,000 Ks without blowing up the motor. But in a nutshell, it's just cleaning up those waste vegetable oils, also waste animal fats. So we went to a camel abattoir, melted down attempted to melt down the fat, turn it into fuel. You did not want to smell the exhaust pipe after that process, but in a nutshell, that it's waste to fuel.
Right. So how I'm fascinated by this. So were you having to plan to stop off at places along the way to get those oils?
Yeah, it was basically so this is rewinding the clock when I was young and ambitious and dumb, arguably, but and likewise 3 mates of mine. So the 4 of us kind of hatched this plan, and it was not very well thought out, Dan, but we made it. But really it was we started at the bottom of Tasmania, and we figured that along the journey we'd just stop off at these Chinese restaurants, these fish and chip shops, and we trailed. We had this trailer that carried the methanol and the caustic soda that we needed for the process, and sort of heating elements and a generator, and just sort of scrounged our way across Tasmania. Chuck, who was also on the expedition with me, he's a welder. We built a boat together out at the family farm with an attempt to cross across Bass Strait. And of course, the engine in that thing broke down about 50 miles offshore, so we had to get rescued. So technically, we didn't make the entire journey on renewable fuel, but hey, that's the magic of TV. You can cut those scenes out, and then the journey continued from Melbourne all the way up to Darwin, bottom of Australia, to the top. Just knocking on people's doors, and people are very happy to give away their waste vegetable oil.
Yeah, wow. So it's quite an adventure. So so you've gone from that. Were you tempted to stay in kind of television production, and did you not want to pursue that line of career? Or?
No, I was completely unqualified, Dan, and remain that way to today. And honestly, so I studied engineering, and it doesn't if that's any indication, it's film and TV is not really for me. I skew more towards the engineering side of things.
Yeah.
The STEM disciplines.
Right. Yeah, and you've done a lot of traveling as well. I'm led to believe. So Salad's been going for, is it about 6 years now? Is that right?
4 years.
4
we
years.
Incorporated. Yeah, our birthday's coming up end of this month. 27th of March 2018 we incorporated, and this has been not much travel in the last 4 months, very much focused on this startup and sort of what we're building in the Web3 space.
Yeah. I think should we dive into Web3, because I think it's still a largely unknown area to those who aren't kind of involved in it. And I guess if you say Web3 to some people, they'll heard of what Facebook are doing with the metaverse. They'll have heard of Bitcoin. They'll hear that every now and then. Some crazy JPEG gets sold for millions of pounds, but that's pretty much about. That's what they hear, and I think a lot of the general public probably think of it as some kind of strange bubble for millionaires to get involved with. But there's and I know there's the technology behind it is literally going to change the world, isn't it? It's going to change every part of how we function in terms of ownership, in terms of currency, in terms of how organizations are run, and I guess for somebody who doesn't know anything about that, just going back to the basics of like where's this come from, and maybe let's do it through your lens, Bob. How did you first hear about Web3 and blockchain, and kind of what made you get excited about it?
Yeah, Dan, that's such a great way to frame the question, because I feel like everyone has their own kind of personal journey when it comes to discovering what's coming with Web3 and what's been thrown around a lot recently, the metaverse. I'll start by saying anyone who knows and tells you they know the answer and where this is going is full of it, because it's there's so many directions this can go, and it's a very nebulous concept for most, as you kind of suggested, and maybe over the conversation we'll kind of build on it. But yeah, let me start with my experience. I first I think for most it starts with Bitcoin, kind of learning and discovering Bitcoin, and that to me is foundational for what is coming with Web3. And I think the aha moment for me, like I'm a millennial, so mid-30s. I grew up with the internet and computers, and I'd always understood the function of Control-C, Control-V. Everyone does. Copy paste. Anything digital you can just replicate, right? But then along came Bitcoin, and for the first time that introduced, we won't get into the specifics of how, but this network introduced this concept of digital scarcity, provable ownership. And so for the first time, you couldn't just Control-C and Control-V, and the concept of being able to actually own something digital was introduced, which is foundational for everything that's being built or spoken about and worked towards within the Web3 and the metaverse space. You mentioned NFTs before. Those are unique items that can be owned in cyberspace, in the digital realm. So for me, that was the first big sort of aha moment, was recognizing that paradigm shift, and that Control-C, Control-V was no longer ubiquitous. But that I then feel, certainly for the older generation, then begs the question, well, who gives a who cares, right? Like, owning something digital doesn't mean anything to me. And I think that is definitely a nebulous concept that a lot of people struggle to get their head around, and sort of the way that I've rationalized that there can be value within the digital space is that human attention, where we apply our focus, is typically where we find value, or where value manifests. And if you think back to my generation, when we went home after school, We'd go to the local park, hang out with our mates at, the swing set, kick a footy or whatnot. Fast forward to the generation today, these are, kids kind of born from 2000 onwards. When they come home from school, that's not their social life. They throw on a set of headphones and they all meet up and they hang out in these, I suppose, digital playgrounds like Fortnite, Roblox, Minecraft, these different digital spaces. This is what everyone talks about in sort of the metaverse, and that is the foundation of their social life. And so if you're spending, and the average American now spends 7 hours a day interacting with a screen, if you're spending your time, your attention, your focus within the digital space, you have the recipe for meaningful value coupled with that technology breakthrough where we can actually assign value for the first time digitally without, kind of blowing out the Control C, Control V. And so those two big shifts, one being technological, one being societal, where another concept is skins. These are these digital representations of avatars in games. People pay money for those to have their digital selves represented. We've got these two big kind of forces coming together at once. And I think for older generations, it's very nebulous. But if you chat to anyone who's younger than 20, this just makes it's their digital natives that you don't even need to explain the concept to them. They get it. So I think those two foundations are kind of the precursor for what's to come with what is, again, very nebulous Web3, the metaverse, and kind of this future we're working towards digitally.
Yeah. So when did you get into blockchain? When was that kind of realization?
That was 2015. I first heard about it 2014, but 2015 is when I really started to kind of dip my toes.
Right. Wow. You can normally tell somebody's worth by what year they got into Bitcoin. Yeah, it's I remember kind of, I think 2013, 2014 time, hearing about it and seeing the graph on some news channel about how much it was worth, and just kind of it being a fleeting thought in my mind. And
yes,
God, I wish I'd acted on it back then. I wish I'd delved more into it. But yeah, I suppose everyone in the world does now, though. I guess it's the fundamental technology, isn't it, of a decentralized record, I guess, is and it sounds so simple, because I suppose a record of something is we're used to, especially within Web 2, where everything is kept in a central place, or the ownership is central. So, for example, and again, going back to our generation, I'm in my mid-30s as well. I always bring Facebook up as an example when I think about Web 2, but I think anybody who's 10 years younger than us just doesn't even think about Facebook anymore. But I suppose when I type something in or share a photo on Facebook, it then goes on to the Facebook servers wherever they are, and they probably are split up around the world wherever they host their servers. But it's all controlled and owned and ring fenced by Facebook or Meta, as they're now called. And that's just how we deal with things now, isn't it? Like a lot of, especially in education, a lot of people use Google for education, or they use Microsoft Teams. And when they upload their files onto there, and they use the cloud services, or they're just using the cloud tools, it's all owned. It's all within the realm of Microsoft or Google. And I think when we don't realize as this much, but it's that central ownership means that those few companies have kind of a bit of a monopoly on kind of the internet, I guess, especially when we think of those giants like Google and Microsoft. But the kind of inverted way of looking at it for blockchain, which is what Bitcoin is built on, is that there's no central ownership, is there? There's a kind of the record of where this stuff is kept, these computer codes that we know as blockchain in Bitcoin are stored on multiple computers around the world. And I know this gets into Salad and how you guys work, but let's pick apart the decentralization first, because why is it taking us this long to realize that we can do this, and it sounds so simple. Why is it such a revolutionary thing?
Yeah, so Dan, you've teed up two big themes for me there. I feel like, and I'll build back up to answering your question. But first of all, I think, and this is certainly related to your question, why do we need decentralization? Back in 2013, when you first heard about Bitcoin, it was a very rational question to ask. Why do we need it? Right? Everything's working. The English pound, the euro, the US dollar, it was all working, right? And the same concept. And fast forward to what we're seeing today. There's a really recent example. There was actually an article written in the Wall Street Journal this week around at a nation state level, with Russia having its foreign reserves essentially shut off. It's like, what is a dollar? What is this unit of measure? So those were the sorts of, what is money? Those were the sorts of questions that just weren't being asked. That even subconsciously, I don't think that was posed in your mind and anyone else's mind who first saw Bitcoin back in 2013. So I think fundamentally, without a strong reason to ask why and question what is, these brand new technologies don't get much attention. So you and me both, I think we can give ourselves a pass for when we first saw Bitcoin. We never really dug deeply into it because there was no motivation and no why. And the exact same concept I would apply to your question, which is around decentralization. You kind of framed how the internet, what we call Web 2, is largely set up today. It's big business, Google, Facebook, or Meta, Twitter. These are what we call the middlemen of the internet. These are big platforms which connect us, but many of them are free, or a lot of them are free. The services are free, and no one really asks how or why. The answer is that you are actually the product. These are all advertising companies. So you, as a individual interacting with the internet, your behavior, your search insights, your search motives, those are tracked. Your location, it gets scarier and scarier. Those are tracked, and that's bundled up into a persona that is then sold by these middlemen of the internet as advertising space, down to the granularity of what's going to be effective on you, Dan. And up until, I would say, only recently, there has not been that why question answered or posed around why is that a problem. But what we're starting to see emerge are events like deplatforming or mainstream. Mainstream is probably the wrong word. Powerful narratives that emerge based on this business model, which they call I'm going to blank on the word here, Dan, but it's like advertising capitalism, right? It's focusing on people's attention and monetizing people's attention. So I think we're not there yet, where collectively we become uncomfortable enough to say, okay, let's really ask the why question around what these products, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Googles of the world. But just analogous to you seeing Bitcoin in 2013, some people are starting to recognize the power, the influence, and how we're all the product for these different platforms. And therein is giving birth to the emergence of Web3, and within Web3 there is decentralization. And so, circling right back to your question, Dan, why do we need this? As these tech platforms, these middlemen of the internet, become more and more influential, they become more and more powerful, and we collectively need to ask the question: well, is that the direction that we want to go? Is that going to be democratic? Is that going to lead to a future that we all want to see? And I think if most people kind of think deeply on it, the answer is no. And so what Web3, what decentralization represents, is the ability for us as individuals to take ownership over our data, our browsing history, our search intent, where we are, and actually change the interaction, change the business model of the internet, where we opt into, or we allow access to our personal data, rather than us kind of unknowingly and unwittingly being monetized and sold to advertisers and thus influenced. So I think kind of in summary there, Dan, these big tech platforms are brilliant at making the user experience amazing. They're brilliant at delivering us these tools and these connections that are seemingly free. And the pain is not yet there for us to really ask the question why around decentralization. And it is just a few people who are a lot of investment last year going into what, kind of where the puck is going, not where it's at today. Yeah. So that'd be my long-winded answer on that one.
Are you struggling to manage your school's Chromebooks and looking for a solution?
Check out the Vault episode with the team from Visor for features and why it can make a difference to managing your devices.
Visor integrates with the Google Admin Console to keep track of your Chromebook inventory and repairs. For an exclusive Edufuturists offer for 20% off for your first year, go to visor.cloud/edu. That's VIZOR.cloud/edu.
I suppose ever since the Industrial Revolution and kind of the era of big companies, big government, whether we like it or not, even in the Western world, we tend to think of Russia, China, that have overarching governments that are controlling, but we live in countries that have big governments that have huge impacts on how we live our lives and the conditions within which we live our lives, in terms of the economics, and you've touched on there the way centralized currencies work as well. But and I guess when the internet started, back in the late 90s, when people started emailing and started creating their own websites, their AOL website or whatever it was, and it had that real feeling of doing something independent, of communicating without a middleman, I guess. And then, lo and behold, within the next 10 years, we had kind of the same as what was happening outside of the digital world, in terms of big business, big government. We now had big business, big government within the internet as well, and I suppose we've come to realize that. I know we're talking about 2013 a lot as a bit of an anchor date. I remember back in 2013 still thinking that the internet was very much a place of total free speech. You could say what you wanted, and if someone didn't like it, they could move on, but it wouldn't be pulled down. It wouldn't be censored. Fast forward 9 years, and we live in a very censored internet, don't we? And some people would say that's for the best, and I know we have to protect certain vulnerable users of the internet. However, it's who decides, isn't it? That's the critical question: who decides what gets censored and what doesn't get censored? And that goes back to a centralized model. But are we not, or us, our parents, or our grandparents, for generations now, are we not just used to big companies, big government kind of deciding the conditions within which we live. Like, and we're feeling that a lot at the moment, aren't we? Like, over here in the UK with coming out of COVID, they're relying on our gas and oil from Russia. We're seeing fuel prices go through the roof. We're seeing the cost of living is becoming crazy to the point where our government just don't know what to do anymore. They're just avoiding the question when they're asked, because the economy's screwed to a certain extent. And I suppose, and I'm not really asking a question here, it's just a conversation, but my immediate thought at the end of this comes to those centralized systems within our world, and I'm not bringing morality into this at the moment anyway, of whether they're good or bad, but those centralized systems, they've got a lot of power, they've got a lot of wealth, they've got a lot of influence. They're not just going to sit back and let decentralization happen, are they? And we've seen this week Joe Biden gearing up for regulation of cryptocurrency in America. Is that the first signs that big government's going to come in and start controlling Web3? Where does decentralization, the future of that, go, I guess?
Mate, it's a great question. I think one thing we can be confident on is, or a great line of thought, there's a big battle looming, right, between these big organizations, be it companies, be it tech platforms, be it countries, and kind of these decentralized networks that are starting to emerge. There is a big, a lot of friction and a lot of debate kind of looming. And you're right that these organizations, be it companies or countries, have accrued so much power and influence now, and that compounds, right? And so we've reached the point where it's kind of human nature to never want to let go of that power. But I see it, the way I see it fracturing and playing out is, you kind of mentioned China and Russia before. Those are certainly going to go in the direction of fighting and squashing this decentralized kind of movement that we're seeing online. But my hope is, America is kind of famous. I'm not an American, but this is what kind of attracted me to the country. We the people, a core part of their core tenet, and they too have now, the government accrued so much power. There's so much of the GDP. They're not going to want to let go of it. But my hope is they stay true to what was that kind of core concept of the original founding of the states, which is kind of representing the individual and one's right to what is it? See, I'd know this if I was American. Liberty, and whatever those core tenets
I've got no idea.
But I got no idea either. I mean, I've heard it here and there, but that's what blockchain, that's not blockchain, but crypto and these P2P decentralized networks facilitate. So it's going to be really interesting, Dan, how this plays out. And I think it's going to be really traumatic, mate. Where I don't know if you've looked at Ray Dalio's work at all with the Changing World Order. That's a fascinating read, and he talks about these 80-year cycles where this power does accrue, and then sort of a reset happens every 80 or so odd years, and I feel like that's kind of the time we're in now, and decentralization is the answer to that, but it's not going to go. It's not going to be an easy change for sure.
Yeah, and I guess the key tenet to decentralization is harvesting the individual user's computing power to bring it back to the technology, and I suppose it's the key to all this, really, isn't it? In terms of that decentralized ledger, and I know it's also very much key to what you guys are doing over at Salad.
Yeah, so this is kind of grandiose thinking here, I'll admit, but what we're doing here at Salad, we see ourselves sort of changing our relationship with the web. So rather than us being the product when we jump online, and our behavior, our search intent being monetized to advertisers, we see this future where these Web3 P2P networks are how we replace the interactions that are today facilitated by these middlemen of the internet. And what is absolutely core to these distributed protocols, these Web3 networks, is the fact that it runs on individuals' hardware. So you remove that central point of failure, that point which is susceptible to coercion. The government or whoever can go into AWS and say, shut down this network, or deplatform this individual, or demonetize that influencer, or manipulate the algorithm to make sure it doesn't pick up steam, or gain traction and kind of notoriety. You need to remove those centralized points which are susceptible to coercion, and what is absolutely fundamental to doing that is the infrastructure on which our internet runs, and that is storage of data, that is compute cycles, and that is bandwidth. And so here at Salad, we're that's very grandiose thinking, sort of how we see the landscape being in 2030, where every individual runs their own self-sovereign server, and with your computer you can choose what network or what marketplace or what community you want to power with your individual computer and your internet connection. That's a very nebulous concept today, right? So sort of on the journey to realizing that future and changing that relationship that we have with the internet. Today, we focus very much on gamers because they have powerful gaming computers. And when they're not using their computer to play games, we've actually got a piece of open source software that allows gamers to turn that valuable asset they've got, that storage, those compute cycles, that bandwidth, into games, gift cards, subscriptions, and sort of digital purchases. And so that's what we're working on today, and that's what we're growing our network. That's the value proposition we're growing our network with today, is sort of the value you can receive from that asset, that valuable asset you've got. But really where I see this going in the future, and what will be far more important for individuals, is what do they actually support with their computer within the metaverse or within Web3. And because as we see this big debate play out between centralization and decentralization, it'll come down to the individual who will be able to decide what's important to them and what they want to put their compute resources behind, and kind of ensure the integrity of. And you touched on it before, Dan. This is down the line gonna pose real questions for us around morality. Like, where do we draw the line here? What do we allow people to support with their computer through our software? So ultimately, we might end up being kind of a central point of arbitrary or deciding what can and can't run on the Salad network, but at least we're staying true to our value of it being open source, and anything that runs on your computer, you have absolute control over what that resource does and sort of what it goes towards. So that's where we see ourselves fitting within the Web3 space in the future.
Yeah, and I think it's exciting there. I know you're talking, and I've heard you on other interviews, Bob, talking about you always, when people start asking you about kind of Salad, you always talk about, well, this is what we're doing, and then you talk about with the direction you want to go in. And I think that's so vital especially for a Web3 company at the moment. And I was talking to a few friends today, actually. We had a bit of a meeting where we were talking about kind of getting into the Web3 market, and I guess speaking to somebody who's doing it and has done it, all of our conversations come back to, let's get around a table, dream big, but then we get to a point where we're like, either the people, the audience, or the technology just isn't quite there yet. It's not quite there yet. So it's kind of, so I suppose the important thing is getting in there, getting through the door, and then being in a position to pivot when the technology does, or the audience do catch up. Am I right there? Is that?
Oh, absolutely. I think when I think about what we're building here at Salad, and kind of our list of most probable failure modes, being too early is arguably number one, right? Because that concept I just described, it's becoming easier and easier to kind of tell that narrative and have people's imagination conjure up this future that I'm describing, or trying to. 2 years ago, it was very difficult, right? Very, very difficult. That was before terminology like Web3 and the metaverse had really kind of gained traction. But with those foundations, it's becoming more understandable and kind of more palatable for people to see where we fit within the future web. But absolutely, mate, I think running out of runway, running out of money before we realize that future is probably the biggest risk for us. And I think for anyone looking at that has an idea in the Web3 space, particularly if you want to launch like a coin or a protocol, a coin or a token, get in line, right? Go to Coin Market Cap, and there's thousands of them. Yeah. So there's going to be, and this is very similar to the late 90s, a handful of big winners and many, many losers. And so this is naturally part of a radical kind of foundation shaking new technological change coming in, is a speculative craze, boom and bust, until eventually we start to see the winners settle and find their place within this Web3 that's starting to emerge.
Yeah, and I don't know who said it, but and I suppose it is a prediction, so we take it with a pinch of salt, but that over the next decade there's going to be more technological change than there has been in the last century, and I suppose that quote doesn't really make sense until you uncover Web3 and the potential there. But if we even just think about the 10 years between, let's say, 98, back in those people starting to send email, from 98 to 2008 when Steve Jobs stood on a stage and introduced the iPhone, in 10 years going from the basic Web 1 to the iPhone in 2008. And it really, it gets me really excited. But by the time we get to 2030, where the hell are we going to be with this stuff? Like, what is going to be on? What are we going to have? And if it's going to go like that, it's going to be something we can't even wrap our heads around at the moment. It really is. I guess that whole using the computing power of like a hive of computers rather than a centralized system or a centralized company. I remember hearing Charles Hoskinson talk about. He's got a TED talk. He's a guy who's into crypto. I think he was kind of there with Vitalik Buterin at the start of Ethereum, and he talks about kind of this being able to support those who live in the third world, essentially. So those who can't access the big companies, who can't access certain types of finance, who can't access certain types of systems that I guess us in Western countries take for granted. And one of the things that really struck me, and it popped into my mind when I was reading about Salad, was he was talking about kind of the relying on internet, not from a single source like it works now, but using kind of the hive of computers around, and the internet almost being passed on from computer to computer to computer all around the world, and as a way of getting the internet. This was back, I think his TED talk was 2014, and I'm not sure if that's absolutely necessary now with what Elon Musk's doing with Starlink and everything. But I think it's relying on the power of the localized computers. I think it's a really interesting concept, and I know that's kind of it's what you guys are doing, and I want to get into that a bit more in terms of. So if I sign up for Salad, for example, and your programming is using my computing power when I'm not on the computer, what are you doing with it? What are you using the computing power to do? And I know it has something to do around mining and things like that, but can you get into that and tell us what that is and how that works?
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. Before I do, just touching on your point there, I think you're dead right. The democratization of opportunity that's going to come with Web3. I mean, we've seen it with sort of these play to earn games like Axie Infinity. That is perhaps the most profound thing that's coming with this change brought on by Web3. I mean, the amount of privilege that we have being born in, Australia, me living in the States, you in the UK, it's you can't even wrap your head around it. And this now, as our lives become more digital, will start to break down those barriers, and people, in Africa or in the Philippines can start to compete on a more level playing field in the digital space of ideas and competition. So I think that's huge. Coming back to your question around Salad and what's our software doing, so it was Web3. It was these protocols like Ethereum and these other proof of work powered protocols that actually was the why now moment for us. So just to give you a bit of history, it was 2017 when I recognized that these different P2P protocols powered by proof of work mining to secure the network and decentralize it, it assigned a price tag to every connected compute cycle for the first time. So every computer that's connected to the web, kind of like a tap, you can turn on and turn off. Those CPU and GPU cycles, they were worth something. And back in 2017, the unit economics for gaming were really interesting. For gaming PCs, these powerful gaming PCs that have graphical processing units, you could make $30 to $50 to $90 per month if you had a strong, high-end GPU. And I found it really interesting that most gamers were not actually extracting that value. And any rational actor, if you offer them $70 a month, they'll take it. So found it very curious. What's the friction? Why aren't gamers getting involved? And really the core hypothesis, there were a few that came together, but the core was that the value proposition wasn't meaningful or didn't resonate with the mass market. If you say to most gamers, run this library for a month and you'll get 0.000836672 ETH or some other coin or token that you then have to custody and pay tax on and transfer to exchanges, the value proposition is just not there. But if you introduce a different incentive model, different pricing model, and a different value proposition of when you're not using your computer, install this application and we'll turn its value into games, gift cards, subscriptions, digital purchases, that resonates. So that was kind of we've been focusing on the human problem of distributed computing. So demand's been solved for in the marketplace we're building today, in that we already have paying demand in the form of proof of work to build this network. So that answers your question, like what's the computer doing? It's a lot of proof of work today.
So what is, Bob, before we go any further, what does that mean? So if my computer is together with all the computers that's connected with your system is mining, well,
yes.
what does that mean in layman's terms?
Yeah, so proof of work mining, it's a consensus mechanism. It's a way of securing. Okay, so this earlier in this conversation we spoke about how kind of the difference between centralization and decentralization. In a centralized setup, it's easy, right? The Google, the Facebook, the Twitter decides the law essentially. So there's only one person to trust, which is those entities, centralized, the middlemen. In a decentralized network or community or marketplace or any P2P interaction, how do you arrive at consensus on what is, for lack of a better term, the truth or the answer, or who owns what, or what value transferred where? And so proof of work is one of the ways, one of the mechanisms that facilitates that. And to answer your question, basically, it's a bunch of different computers that join the network. There are different. Well, that's probably getting a little too deep, but in a sense, they are all competing to solve a complex equation, and whoever solves it first is kind of rewarded for their work, and also verifies all the transactions that take place within a certain period of time. So that is the block within the blockchain of that protocol. And so it's arbitrary, arguably arbitrary calculations to secure the network, and to verify transactions at a very high level.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to think how to. It's almost like auditing the records and going, right. Yeah, that's
Mate, that's a great way of putting it.
valid.
That's a great way to put it. So rather than like a financial auditor who you have to pay and trust as like an independent, it's essentially, it's actually the exact same interaction, but you're hiring thousands of auditors simultaneously, and these can be unknown individual autonomous actors that join the network and require no centralized kind of stamp of approval to be involved. So that's what facilitates, for certain protocols, the decentralized nature of these different networks. So to date, that's what we've used to monetize the
so
network today.
whoever created that chain, that electronic ledger where there was these sit, they built into the instructions within that when they created it, that whatever computers are doing this get a reward of some of that cryptocurrency. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. And if I can press pause for a second and share a bit of nuance with you about this, is what makes Bitcoin incredibly unique, Dan, is that it's an immaculate conception, right? Where there was no, so we've all heard of Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't know who he is or she or the group of people. They didn't pre-mine and kind of give themselves a bunch of coins or Bitcoins before starting this thing. And they let the network, from this kind of immaculate conception on a forum somewhere, just organically grow. And individual actors, more miners, joined the network, and it became more and more secure over time, and more people interacted. That is unique, and I believe will always be unique to Bitcoin. If we go back to the conversation we had before about the big fight that's coming between, potentially governments and crypto, or Federal Reserve and reserve banks and crypto, there's no one you can point a gun at in the blockchain, the Bitcoin network. Whereas you mentioned Vitalik before, Ethereum, we have known individuals. It was. I mean, it's an amazing project. This is essentially how we monetize here at Salad. So I'm a huge fan, but it has a level of susceptibility to coercion through the form of known individuals who are big stakeholders in the network, that make that, in this looming battle that we sort of spoke about, a far easier network to shut down, or to be subject to coercion, whatever form that might take in the future. So I think that was it. Sorry for the little detour there, but that was an interesting kind of point to make. Even though both of them are proof of work, you got to factor in the history here of these networks, and that has nuance around the networks themselves. But back to Salad, if I may, just to finish out my train of thought. So we've spent the last 4 years really thinking about the human problem, and how do we motivate and incentivize individuals to share their compute and kind of retain them on the network. And then you ask the question, like, what is your computer actually doing? So our software is open source, meaning that you can inspect on GitHub what it is you're installing. Individuals, and this is functionality we're working on and still have to this day, it's just not accessed easily yet, but you can choose exactly what your computer does. So there'll be like a la carte menu, and there'll be a checkbox like Salad, you decide what's most profitable, Or you might say, you know what, I don't want to like relay Netflix packets for VPNs or something like that. So you can opt out of these different workloads. So you'll always have complete autonomy over what it is your computer does. And where it gets really exciting is we've had 15 years of cloud computing technologies. So containerization, orchestration, virtual machines. That technology now ships native to consumer operating systems. So what we're looking at is AWS, the big cloud computing kind of pioneer. They have these products called spot instances. Individuals, so gamers, can now compete and provide essentially the exact same product, a spot instance, a virtual machine on their gaming laptop, and compete with these cloud providers. And so that's what we're facilitating here at Solid. It's in a secure virtual machine that runs on your gaming laptop, and that allows you to monetize that machine and essentially service things like artificial intelligence workloads, or simulating the weather, or crunching, providing horsepower for engineering simulations. And AWS charges at least 5 times as much as what proof of work mining pays. So that's the future we're really excited about, is unlocking the value that already exists today in every gaming PC out there, and delivering that value to gamers directly.
Yeah, it's interesting because before this I was thinking, why is the audience gamers? Why does it have to be? Why is it not just anybody with a computer? But I think I've just realized it's because gaming computers will have a lot more power and CPU power in them. Yeah.
And our ambition long term is to be available for all consumers, because every computer is valuable. But picking up on your point, we started with the gamers because the unit economics are there. They got the best hardware. The GPUs. It's kind of like comparing an old Toyota Corolla to a Ferrari in the digital space, processing power, horsepower equivalent kind of thing. So that's where we started. But eventually, we do see us. Our mission is to be the easiest and most trusted way to share your computer. So that expands far beyond gaming over time.
It's interesting. I'm just thinking, going back to education, there are campuses, thousands and thousands of campuses, probably millions of campuses around the world that have high-end computers in them for students that just sit there overnight when the students aren't on campus. When the student, it could be a real interesting way for educational institutions to earn a bit of extra income there.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's so how does the business model work? So do you the funds you receive from doing the proof of work with bringing all the computer power together, is it you taking a cut of that and then with the rest of it buying the vouchers and distributing them? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so we actually with proof of work, with these Web3 protocols, we always have and we always will pay 100% to the user, or project 100% of the balance that their PC has generated.
Okay. So how does Solid generate?
Yeah. So right now, or over the course of a day, there'd be 25,000 machines generating value on the network. All of those coins and tokens, all that value comes into our custody. We project a balance to the user. So say you've got $5 that you can redeem after running Solid for a couple of days. From those redemptions, would be it a game, a gift card, a Netflix, or a Discord subscription, we take a margin because we're kind of the wholesale retailer there. So that's our business model today. But as we look forward, and these we're able to unlock these higher paying compute jobs, we will start to take some margin on the compute side. But Web3, those open markets, will always provide 100. They'll be our baseline kind of workload, and users will always get 100% of the value from that.
Right. Okay. It's a really interesting business model, that, isn't it? That you're actually you're earning your income from being a reseller of the voucher codes and not touching the proof of work.
Well, and it's
money
and
generated.
it's a really interesting monetization mechanism for the gaming industry, right? So you think about a lot of these popular games today, they're free to play. 97% of people never actually pay for anything. They're just free to play payers. 3% is where the revenue comes from. Here at Solid, those games are installed on machines that have untapped value of $30 a month. So we're working on a payment gateway and sort of an SDK to allow retailers and game studios to actually monetize their games from the hardware on which they are installed. So we're really excited about extracting that value and delivering it to the user in a way that's or the gamer in a way that's really, really meaningful, and that's where we're focused.
Yeah, I love talking about this. I love it. I think it's going to be a really interesting next few years coming up, and it sounds like you're in a great position to take advantage of that and to be contributors to what's going on. So I'm looking forward to seeing where you guys go and where the whole Web3 market goes. Bob, if anyone wants to find out and start using Salad, where do they go? What do they do?
Yeah, salad.com is where you go. We've got a new website that's about to be released, and we're really excited about. Or go to our discord.gg/salad for our kind of gaming community. There's 50,000 people in there, and that's where you'll find us, and you can ask more questions.
Fantastic, Bob. Thanks for joining us all the way from Puerto Rico, and it's to the north of England. It's been great to connect with you and to have this chat, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Likewise, Dan. Thanks for your time.